Hi everybody. Well, we're back. You might be able to guess what chapter this is. It's my best that I can do with what I have at hand. Chapter 7, The Tragedy of Torgo. I'm not going to bother talking about anything else today. I'm just going to get right into this chapter. As just about any fan of Manos, and most will agree, one of the most memorable performances in the film is the character of Torgo, as portrayed by John Reynolds. The brooding, bearded young man with the deformed thighs, wobbling walk, facial tics, and peculiar line delivery stands out in most viewers' minds as one of the most engaging peculiarities of a very peculiar film. But behind the scenes, the story of John Reynolds is far from funny. In fact, the young actor who had just turned 25 years old on September 15th, 1966, would be dead by his own hand on October 16th. The show would go on at the Capri Theater, with the Manos premiere just 1 month later on November 15th. Although John Reynolds' troubles undeniably began long before Manos entered his life, the hands of fate may have given him a nudge further down the dark road on which he had already been traveling. John Markward Reynolds Jr.'s life began on September 15, 1941, in Jackson, Mississippi, the son of a decorated military man and the former Sarah Fulton. Brigadier General John Reynolds served a 31-year military career, beginning with in-flight training in 1935 at Randolph and Kelly Fields in San Antonio, and served in the Army Air Corps as a flying cadet until October 1936, when he was commissioned a second lieutenant in the regular Army Air Corps. He became commander of the 2nd Bomb Wing stationed at Hunter Air Force Base, Savannah, Georgia, February 1st, 1952, and was promoted to Brigadier General in June 1953, while commanding that unit before the family's last transfer to Biggs Air Force Base in El Paso while John was a preteen. A picture of John from the Hoofbeats Burgess High School yearbook in 1956 shows a clean-cut young man with a shy smile. In November 1957, as a 16-year-old high school student, John and 17 other boys formed a club through the YMCA, the Lions at 5 Points, El Paso. John was president of the group, now named Adelphi High Y, that was charted into the High Y Fellowship, whose purpose was the development of members through social services, projects, education, athletics, social activities, and worship. After high school, John served in the U.S. Army from February 1961 to January 1964, when he left to enter school at Texas Western University. There he became involved in college and community theater. My dad and John had met at the Festival Theater in 1964. They were passionate about theater and both were considered method actors, channeling the theories of Stanislavski, which uses improvisation, physical, and emotional exercises to develop an artistic discipline. Although their individual approaches were different, and Dad felt that John never really approved of his interpretation of the style, both recognized the thespian spirit in each other, which bonded their friendship with mutual respect. Dad considered John a dear friend and remembered him as a natural actor who could reach into himself, pull out the character, and then stay with it, revealing an introspective creative force. They both wrote poetry and short stories and met several times at John's small apartment in downtown El Paso for readings. On those occasions, Dad recalls that John was far more interested in sharing his own work than examining Dad's or anyone else's, as though he just needed someone to hear him. Dad, unfazed, empathized with the quiet storm brewing inside this yet restless young man. He understood John's dissatisfaction with the standards of the day and related to his depression, giving him the space he needed to express himself. Both men suffered from severe depression in a time when a man was expected to be a man, and any infirmity that was not physically obvious would have received little sympathy. John was a loner, outwardly shy, distant to most, and passionately philosophical with those he trusted to decipher the meaning of his words. His writings and the theater seemed to be the main things that kept him connected to the world around him. In 1966, John moved to a small brick house on North Cotton Street, just 2 blocks from our home. I remember visiting there with Dad a couple of times. I don't have clear memories of these visits, but my dad says it was just a touch base. Dad recalls John being really high on something heavy like LSD on more than one of these drop-in visits. Dad would try to get him engaged in healthier activities by inviting him to our house for dinner or out to the desert to hunt turquoise and abandoned treasures, but John always declined. In a devastating demonstration of hopelessness, John ultimately planned his own ending in one of the most dramatic and permanent ways possible. A self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. It was a shocking loss for all who knew him. Dad was chilled to the core, wondering what he could have done differently to change the outcome, and overwhelmed in the face of his own suicidal thoughts. Dad never doubted that at least some of John's mental anguish came from his last acting role in Manos, but clearly, John had accumulated a number of other very powerful reasons to die. Nikki Mathis, who sang Forgetting You for the soundtrack, had known John briefly when she was in the chorus of Finian's Rainbow, in which John played the lead. She only knew him in the way people do who come together to work, but she thought he was a beautiful soul with a beautiful talent and a terrific actor who was serious about his craft. She recalls being totally shocked on hearing of his death. It was a complete and unexpected surprise to everyone. Although I was only 7 at the time, I clearly remember the morning after his death, the day my mother and I heard it on the news. It was a Monday morning, October 17th, 1966. We were on our way to school, Ben Milam Elementary School on Fort Bliss in El Paso, where Mom was a teacher. Our family wasn't military, but because she taught at the school, I attended 2nd grade there. Mom was driving while listening to the news on the car radio, and I was daydreaming out the window watching the overcast sky on a blustery day. Suddenly I heard my mother gasp and then burst into tears. She instantly pulled over to the curb and, still sobbing, said, "John's dead." I knew exactly who she meant. In retrospect, I feel I knew more than I should have in that moment. At a core level, I must have known something of his sadness while he was alive. Stunned, I began to cry too. The friend who used to make me laugh with magic tricks and pratfalls was gone. I just sat there in the passenger seat, quietly crying and hoping that this wasn't real, that things could be normal again. Wishing it was one of those bad dreams that are so tangible until you awaken, breathless. We took our time, maybe only a few endless minutes, while traffic passed us by and the world kept traveling on its way. Mom composed herself, finding tissues in the glove compartment and checking her face in the mirror. Then she glanced in my direction, realized that I was sitting beside her, silently horrified. There was another beat of time, and then she put the car in gear, continuing on to school and work for an endless, miserable day. Later, I would learn some of the details from overhearing the adults talking about it, and that's when I found out exactly what he'd done. And I couldn't erase the image from my young mind. I heard the words, shotgun, in his mouth, blew his head off. No one seemed to be aware of the child hovering around and listening. I went and hid in my room alone to cry and to think about how lonely he must have been. I remember thinking I knew how he felt, but why did he have to do that? I was terrified because I'd experienced the stirrings of the same kind of finality within my own family, and now I had a name for it: suicide. Dad went with Bob Guidry to the funeral at Fort Bliss National Cemetery on October 19th. Under John's high-ranking father's direction, the affair became a quasi-military service that was so contrary to how his friends had known him that to them it bordered on the absurd. Dad and Bob had known John very differently than his father had, and the effort to honor his son in this way made it difficult for them to remain by the gravesite longer than absolutely necessary. Bob waited with Dad at the cemetery gate until it was all over. Dad remembers joking mercilessly with Bob about the showiness of the affair and imagining how John would have been appalled at the whole thing. John's mother had sought Dad out before the funeral, requesting to spend some time with him afterward, so Dad stayed close by to attend to her wishes. She was so heartbroken at the loss of her son and felt she'd lost her boy without knowing who he truly was. She craved understanding and needed to learn something of him from someone who she knew had been a good friend. Once the service was finally over, John's mom spent the rest of the afternoon driving Dad around El Paso so he could show her the places her son had enjoyed. He took her to a local empty church that was slated to become a new community theater. Several people had organized to remodel to the building to bring it to life, and Dad suggested they name it after John. The day before, he had met with the group, gaining support and a verbal agreement. At the site, Dad and John's mom walked around with Dad pointing out the changes that had been planned and she expressing her approval of the idea. She felt a bit of comfort knowing her son would be honored and be remembered in this way, and offered Dad a $25 donation towards getting it off the ground. She expressed her intention to one day attend a performance at the Reynolds Community Theater. After she dropped him back at his car, Dad took the money to the people who were supposedly organizing the fundraiser and then went home, thinking he would become more involved in the project. He believed it would be good for his heart, help bring closure and create something positive from such a dreadful tragedy. The very next day, he learned by chance that the people he handed the money to had taken it and gone out for pizza right after he'd given it to them. He knew then, without a doubt, that the theater was never going to happen, and withdrew from the project in disgust. In his own time, John Reynolds didn't get the respect he deserved. In the first Manos review, the morning after the premiere, reporter Betty Pierce titled her El Paso Herald article, "Hero Massaged to Death in Manos, the Hands of Fate," describing him as a luckless young man with his underwear so bunched up he can hardly get around in no time to straighten it out, while going on to mention his beautiful set of teeth. John's memory would have to wait for another 27 years to be honored publicly when Manos came to television by way of MST3K. On screen, in his only film role, John comes across as a sympathetic character in contrast to the role of a dark leader's mindlessly obedient henchman. The character of Torgo elicits a protectiveness amongst Manos fans that go beyond the part that John played. He is fascinating, awkward, fragile. He is completely earnest in his acting while risking himself through self-medication just to get through it. John's death came just 1 month after his 25th birthday and 1 month before the premiere. We can't know why he chose to finish his commitment to filming but not to see the result. Who he was and who he could have been will forever be a mystery. What we do know is that his memory endures in a myriad of subcultures and mainstream avenues. Torgo is depicted in costume and recognized at cons all around the world. He even appeared as a fictional murder suspect on an episode of the television series Elementary. The Iceman Cometh, March 2012. Torgo is commonly referenced as a slow pizza delivery boy thanks to Mike Nelson's Torgo's Pizza sketch on MST3K, and has artistic renderings of his image posted all over the internet. John died much too young to possibly glimpse a hint of his future fame, but Torgo will endure as long as Manos is remembered, maybe even longer. Thank you so much. Come back tomorrow for Chapter 8, The Music of Manos. And thanks for following along. If you've missed anything, my daughter-in-law just helped me get my whole my whole site together on YouTube, so it should be working and everything in order. Thank you. See you soon.